Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Morty & Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be doing a unit review of the new Scout Sentinel. In case you've not seen one of these unit reviews before, what I like to do is go over the unit, give it a bit of a summary, and then we dive into deeper detail. What are the pros and cons, what you can achieve with this unit, and then at the end, we give it a score out of 10 and a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So without further ado, let's forward deploy, blast some Ewoks, and dive straight into today's video. Scout Sentinels are the traditional recon unit of the Imperial Guard. Unlike their armoured sisters, they have an open compartment and they are festooned with lots of auger and scanning devices to enable their pilots to survey the battlefield with ease. Their lighter armour and gyro stabilizers assist them in swiftly traversing the roughest terrain and bringing their heavy weapons to bear suddenly from unanticipated angles. Scout Sentinel pilots tend to be mavericks that are used to operating outside of the chain of command and without the supervision of their officers. They tend to be very self-sufficient and a little bit insubordinate, but these traits are overlooked by the commanders because of the valuable intel that Sentinels offer to the Imperial Guard. On the tabletop, you will find the Scout Sentinels in the fast attack section of your codex. They are light vehicles that can be taken in squadrons of 1 to 3 models. Unlike other vehicles in the Imperial Guard multiple, like the Leman Russ, that can be purchased in squads of 1 to 3, but then they split up when you deploy them on the battlefield, Scout Sentinels work like squads of infantry. You can take them with 1 person, or you can take them with 3 models in the unit, but they have to stick together. Sentinels come with the core, platoon, and squadron keywords. This means that they can receive many benefits and orders from your support characters and stratagems. The Scout Sentinels profile reflects their light vehicle status. They have a movement value of 12, weapon skill 4+, ballistic skill 4+, strength 6, toughness 6, wound 7, attacks 2, leadership 7, and a 4+ save. I know some of you will be curious to know the difference between a Scout Sentinel's profile and an Armored Sentinel's profile. Well, the Scout Sentinel has a 12-inch of movement, whereas the Armored Sentinel only has 8 inches of movement, and the Scout Sentinel has a 4+ save, whereas the Armored Sentinel has a 3+ save. So essentially, in terms of their profiles, you are trading a armor save value for better movement on your Scout Sentinel. In terms of weapon loadouts, both Sentinels can take the same options. That means that the Scout Sentinel comes with a Militarum multi-laser, but you can swap that out with an autocannon, a heavy flamer, a las cannon, a missile launcher, or a Militarum plasma cannon. These chicken walkers also have a couple of interesting optional upgrades. The first one is the Sentinel Chainsword. This is a melee weapon. It is strength user, AP -2, 2 damage, and it gives the bearer an extra attack. That means that a Sentinel armed with a Chainsword will strike with 3 attacks at strength 6, AP -2, 2 damage. That's a big upgrade over its standard combat profile. Each walker can also be given a Hunter Killer Missile. This is a one-shot weapon and it is a great way of supplementing your Sentinel's firepower and giving it the ability to do a spike of damage on 1 turn. Scout Sentinels also have the Daring Recon special ability. During deployment, when you set up this unit, it can be set up anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches away from the enemy deployment zone and any enemy models. Forward deploy abilities are very powerful and sought after in Warhammer 40k, and it is great to see Guard finally getting access to these with the Scout Sentinel. Important side note here, this Daring Recon ability is really what separates the Scout Sentinel from its armored cousin. The Armored Sentinel has no way to forward deploy. So that covers the profile, the weapons, and the abilities of the Scout Sentinel. Now, I know at several points in this video, I've already made references and comparisons to the Armored Sentinel. This really is a Scout Sentinel focused episode, I promise guys, but it is almost impossible not to make those comparisons as we go along. However, if you want to see a proper dedicated Armored Sentinel episode, then please check out the link at the end of this video, because I've already done my Armored Sentinel unit review and I go into a lot of detail there on the pros and cons of that unit. But now it's time to go into the details of the Scout Sentinel. What are the pros and cons of this unit? How do you use it on the battlefield? The first thing to mention about the Scout Sentinel is that it is flexible. And I don't mean it can put its legs behind its head. I mean that it can perform a wide variety of battlefield roles in your army. One of the simplest but most effective roles that the Sentinel can perform is that of a weapons platform. Scout Sentinels and Armor Sentinels both have access to a plethora of weapon systems. You can take light infantry decimators in the form of the multi-laser, or you could have it hunt down enemy light vehicles with an autocannon or a rocket launcher. Perhaps you prefer it to go after harder targets. Well, it can take a plasma cannon and a las cannon, and don't forget, no matter what weapon you pick, you can give it a hunter-killer missile. Perhaps you want a squadron of Sentinels that are dedicated to taking down enemy armor. Well, give them a las cannon or a plasma cannon, also strap on a hunter killer missile, and you've got a unit that could potentially put out 6 shots that are damage D6, guaranteed to put the pain on any enemy vehicles. Or perhaps you want a flexible unit whose primary job is to hunt down enemy infantry, but can in a pinch supplement your anti-tank firepower. Well, take a Sentinel with a multi-laser or autocannon and then strap a hunter killer missile to the side, and that unit will be able to help out in any situation. Or perhaps you're a little bit of a more aggressive combat-focused guard player who wants to take the fight to the enemy. Well then, put a heavy flamer on your Scout Sentinel and also a Sentinel Chainsword, and you'll have a unit that can burn baby burn and also have that melee weapon for those close encounters. The point that I am trying to make, and the one that I am more than likely massively over-laboring, is that before we've even got to the special abilities, you can see that just from the Sentinel's loadouts, it is very flexible and you can use it in almost any battlefield role. You just have to plan and decide what you want it to do. But speaking of special abilities, this really unlocks an extra tier of Sentinel shenanigans, because the forward deploy of the Sentinel allows it to do a couple of things that you'll struggle to find other units in your guard arsenal are able to do. In my mind, Daring Recon allows you to perform 3 sneaky tricks. The first one is that you could use big units of Sentinels, maybe 3 squads of 3 of them, to forward deploy as far forward towards the enemy as possible. And if you get the first turn, you could use them to seriously move block your opponent. What you've got to remember is that if your opponent is not infantry or does not have the fly keyword, he can't go through your units. He has to go round them. On the terrain heavy boards of competitive 40k, that could mean the difference between your opponent being able to get out of his deployment zone or spending the first turn completely stuck in it. Sure, all of your Scout Sentinels may die because they're going to bear the brunt of your opponent's first turn damage output, but if your opponent cannot get out of his deployment zone turn 1, that means he can't get onto those midfield objectives. That means it comes around to his turn 2 and he is going to score very few primary points, and you might even have messed up his secondaries as well. Using Scout Sentinels to move block your opponent allows you to get ahead on points early. One of the things that guard tends to have to do is struggle through the first 2 turns. Your opponent gets ahead, but then turns 3, turns 4, turns 5, your firepower brings the game back round to you and you're able to start scoring points. What if you didn't have to rely on such a risky strategy? What if you could just earn the points you needed from the get-go? That's what Scout Sentinels allow you to do. Your opponent's so busy dealing with them for the first turn that allows you to get in position, secure the middle ground, dig in, and be ready for anything. Now, forward deploying to move block is kind of a big bollocks maneuver, and it can sometimes backfire. What if you don't get first turn? Well, if you don't get first turn, there's still a chance that you can forward deploy your Sentinels in such a manner that they're going to be able to move block the majority of your opponent's movement. But if you don't get that first turn and you're like, shit, I'm really not actually going to move block him all that much, I kind of want to pull back to my own lines and be able to now resume my role as a fire platform, well, don't worry, you can absolutely do that. If you're planning on using your Sentinels as forward deploy shenanigans, you're going to want to take a Warlord trait to support them. And that warlord trait is Master Tactician. What this allows you to do is redeploy 3 of your units after you have rolled off to see who goes first, but before anyone has had any command phases or anything like that. By combining Daring Recon with Master Tactician, it allows you to forward deploy your sentinels right in your opponent's grill. But then if things go a bit squiffy and sideways, you can just use Master Tactician to bring them back to where you need them. Keep them safe, keep them secret. This ability to forward deploy and redeploy also plays into the second way that you could use your Scout Sentinels. And this is all out turn 1 aggression. All right, because if you equip your sentinels with a bunch of heavy flamers and chainsaws and you go down that combat sentinel route, that can be a really effective tool and a real problem for certain factions to deal with. For example, if you're facing down a Tau gun line and they've got a lot of chaff infantry like fire warriors and Kroot that they're kind of relying upon to be able to score their objectives whilst their battlesuits run around doing the damage and distracting you, well, you could use your 3 units of choppy Scout Sentinels to forward deploy, get turn 1, move up, start burning, and then getting in amongst them with those chainswords. Sentinel chainswords are not the greatest melee weapon in the world, but they will absolutely carve through some fire warriors or some Kroot with relative ease. I mean, you're going to be wounding them on 2s, and if they're Kroot, they ain't getting a save, and if the fire warriors, they're going to be on a 6 up. If you use Gaunt's Ghost to support this kind of maneuver, they can also forward deploy and Gaunt can order your Sentinels. This means that you could order them to fix bayonets, which means suddenly you've got AP -3 Sentinels hitting on 3s, and that really is going to start tearing through that line infantry. This is going to really mess up a Tau player's ability to be able to get those objectives with those cheap little chaff units, and it's also going to mean that he's got units up close and personal in his grill from the beginning, something that no Tau player wants to be dealing with. If we follow this rabbit hole down even further, by using your Sentinels in this manner against armies like Tau that are fragile like the gunline, it means you can distract them for long enough for your real combat punch to turn up. There is a theory guard list that I really like the idea of, where you take 3 of the Scout Sentinels, you forward deploy them in this manner, you get in amongst them, you use them to start messing up your opponent's light infantry, and then by the time they've dealt with this, there's a unit of Rough Riders or 3 following up with a proper big charge. The reason this is important is that if your Scout Sentinels have been successful in removing your enemy's chaff, they won't have anything to put in the way of your Rough Riders, and then you're going to start lancing down those important units. Something as big as even Riptides do not want to be taken down by Melter Lances. Now, both of these first 2 tactics are very balls to the wall. They are all gas, no brakes. However, they are very high risk and they do require significant investment. I mean, you could be looking at 360 points on your Sentinels, and then you've got to start taking things like a specific Warlord trait to support them. That's a CP you've got to spend, and then you might also need to take something like Gaunt's Ghost to support them. You're looking at another 120 points. Then you might be thinking about, well, I need some Sentinel Chainsaws. Look, overall, going all out with your Sentinels could easily cost you 500 points. That's a quarter of your army. That's a big investment. But the third way you can use Sentinels, I find, is a lot lower risk for still a very high reward. It's not as exciting, but it is probably more tactical and also more take-all-comers because it'll be useful in almost any game. This more sensible Sentinel strategy is where you use them to forward deploy onto mid-board objectives. This allows you to take mid-board objectives early on, which is something that Guard can struggle with, especially if you're running a traditional infantry and Leman Russ focused force. And by getting onto these mid-board objectives early on, it's allowing you to play the primary game and it's earning you victory points right from the get-go. It's also potentially unlocking additional victory points via your secondaries, for example, engage on all fronts. And the best bit is, it's an incredibly low investment of points. 2 to 3 Scout Sentinels, no special upgrades is more than enough to pull this off. That is an 80 to 120 points investment, much less than what we were looking at before with the very aggressive maneuvers. One big point in the favor of this third tactic is that in competitive 40k, you tend to find that boards are incredibly terrain heavy. In addition to this, most objectives can be held from within terrain. That means that you could have a Scout Sentinel forward deploy onto an objective and it's safe out of line of sight. Now, whichever strategy you decide to employ your Scout Sentinels for, it's important to remember that they have access to a huge variety of buffs, and these buffs could easily help them fulfill their intended battlefield role. Sentinels have the platoon and squadron keywords. This means they can receive any kind of order in your guard codex. That's right, even though they are vehicles, Sentinels can still receive orders from your commissars or your regimental officers like Castellans and command squads. Now, there are some straightforward choices here. Maybe you want to make your Sentinels better at shooting. Well, give them take aim and they can suddenly hit on +1 and they've got an extra AP on their guns. Or maybe you want to really make them decent in combat. Tell them to fix bayonets. I don't know where they're putting it, but tell them to fix bayonets and then they will get +1 to hit in combat. Great for boosting your Sentinel chainswords. But there are also some really big brain options in here as well. For example, you could tell your Sentinel to move. If it does so, it gets to add 2 inches to its normal movement characteristic, putting up to a 14-inch move. And also, when it advances, it can just add 6. It doesn't have to roll the dice. That means you've got a Sentinel that could go 20 inches in a single turn. If you start getting really crazy and taking regimental doctrines like Swift as the Wind, you could be looking at a Scout Sentinel that can go 22 inches in a single move. Or you could make your Sentinels more durable by telling them to take cover, turning that 4+ save into a 3+ save. But if you really want to start playing 5D chess, then you need to take a look at the Perfector's orders for your Sentinels. You could easily tell them to remain vigilant, and this means that enemy units that are set up on the battlefield as reinforcements cannot be set up within 12 inches of this unit. This truly unlocks the Scout Sentinel's 4th strategy, which is to be a massive anti-deep strike bubble. Even a single Sentinel with this remain vigilant order on it can completely lock down huge swathes of the board from enemy deep strikers. Don't forget, there are a ton of armies out there that have some kind of sneaky way of getting a deep strike in the first turn. It might be Space Marines with drop pods, or it could be Necrons with their Veil of Shadows, or it could be the Thousand Suns with the Dark Matter Crystal. It doesn't matter. There are a load of armies out there that can teleport across the board turn 1. Well, if you've got a Scout Sentinel who is remaining vigilant, they ain't getting close to you. As for mechanized orders, I really like Shock and Awe for Sentinels. This order gives the Sentinel objectives secured. And if you're playing against an opponent who has min-maxed, where they've got a lot of units, but very few of them have got objectives secured, this could be really tricky for them to deal with. They may be able to move on to those midfield objectives and contest them, but they might have to do that with more elite troops that don't have OBSEC. If that's the situation, then they may find themselves moving on to an objective which they don't control because you've got a cheeky OBSEC Sentinel on it. Sentinels also benefit from a lot of stratagems, but my favorite one has to be Maverick Maneuvers. This one command point stratagem allows your Sentinels to jump, shoot, jump. It's like facing off against Eldar, Fire and Fade. You could take a squadron of Sentinels, move them out from behind cover, shoot with them, spend 1 command point, and they can move 6 inches back inside of that cover. It means that you can shoot your opponent with impunity, and if he's not got indirect fire, he's really going to struggle to deal with your Maverick Maneuver Sentinels. One last thing to mention is that these walkers also pair up nicely with a lot of different regimental doctrines. I've already mentioned Swift as the Wind, but you could also take advantage of Armored Superiority, which means that your Sentinels would count as 3 models for holding objectives rather than 1. Combine that with OBSEC, and you really do have a unit that is very good at snatching objectives off your opponent. Veteran Guerrillas specifically buffs Sentinels because it says each time an infantry or Sentinel model with this doctrine makes an attack that targets a unit within 18 inches, the target does not receive the benefits of cover. If you're going to be forward deploying, you're probably going to be within 18 inches of the enemy, and then they're not going to be able to get any dense or light cover, which is great. Another cheeky one that people sometimes forget about is that Cult of Sacrifice actually pairs well with Sentinels too. Each time a model with this doctrine makes an attack, if that model's unit was below its starting strength, when it was selected to shoot or fight, add 1 to that attack's hit rolls. That means if you're taking a big unit of 3 Sentinels and one of them dies, the other 2 Sentinels get +1 to hit. That's nothing to turn your nose up at. Scout Sentinels also do very well in expert bombardiers lists, because each time an artillery model with this doctrine makes a ranged attack, if the target of that attack is within 12 inches of and visible to a friendly Voxcaster or Sentinel unit, add 1 to that attack's hit rolls. Now, guard artillery has recently taken a bit of a nerf due to the fact that if they fire indirectly, they get -1 to hit, and the enemy also gets +1 save. That really reduces their damage output. But if you've got Scout Sentinels that are forward deployed, you'll be able to be within 12 inches, you'll be able to then trigger expert bombardiers, which starts getting round the indirect fire nerf. Those are just a few of the regimental doctrines that pair well with Sentinels, but there are loads more of them for you to take advantage of. Now, I know some of you are going to be saying, Morning Glory, you've talked about a lot of these big brain 4D chess maneuvers that you can pull off with Scout Sentinels, but what about just spamming them, taking 9 of them, surrounding them around an officer and a command squad, giving them take aim, and just having them hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s to hit, and rerolling 1s to wound? Why have you not discussed that? Well, simply put, if you're not even planning on using their daring recon ability, then you shouldn't really be considering Scout Sentinels. You should instead be looking at Armor Sentinels. That is an absolutely valid tactic to do with your walkers, but you might as well have the right tool for the job, and Armor Sentinels, frankly, are just better at it because they're tougher, and being tougher is very important as a fire support unit because you're going to draw enemy counterfire and you need to be able to weather it. But overall, I would describe Sentinels as a great toolbox unit. If you build them right and you plan around them, they can be useful in every single game against almost any opponent that you come across. As a result, I am going to give them a solid 8 out of 10. They get 2 thumbs up. They are definitely Mordian approved. The reason I've docked 2 points and not given them a 10 out of 10 is because, firstly, they are not the most durable unit, and if you end up having to use them as a fire support unit, let's say you forward deploy them, things don't go quite right and you have to bring them back and they end up just basically being more guns in your arsenal, well, there are units that point for point are better at that job than the Sentinels. And secondly, Armor Sentinels are a little bit susceptible to getting wrapped and trapped by your opponent, and a clever opponent, especially if they are an assault-based army, will use your Sentinels against you. If you forward deploy them, then your opponent might end up being able to move and then charge your Sentinels, which gets him more movement in his turn, and therefore your Sentinels have actually gone from an advantage to a disadvantage. So they are not without their faults and they are not without their weaknesses. But overall, even though Rough Riders are way more powerful and Scout Sentinels are not as tough as Armor Sentinels, they do have much greater tactical flexibility and they have the potential to do so much more on the battlefield. But that's just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are you team Armor Sentinel or are you team Scout Sentinel? If you have enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you've really enjoyed today's video and you want to go the extra mile, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. One of the biggest perks you get by being a channel member or Patreon is access to the Mordian Glory Discord. This is an online community of over 800 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord, and there's always someone to talk to about memes, tactics, army lists, hobbying, painting, pretty much anything 40k related. We also have a ton of really experienced players in the community, so not only is it a great place to hang out and have fun, but it's also a great resource for you to draw upon. And I just want to take a moment now to say a big thank you to the latest channel members. Big thank you to Zoltan Hughes, nstubs88, Benjamin Klarman, Marol the Knife, 13th Century Jackass, Fabio, Ethan, Taste of Wang, Aberrated, Grey Knight 1, LDZ, Apsalar, and Sean Statsney. Thank you guys for becoming channel members. Thank you for doing your part. And I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreons as well. So thank you to Matthew Chuel, Ever7 Chun, Alex DePaz, TS, Pierre, John Thacker, and Joseph Crystal. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Bonbon Vert, Phil French, Ross Miller, Tequal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and August Varney. Thank you guys. Your generous support makes a huge difference, and it is a big part of how I'm able to do this full time. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.